On a dry, still night, a woman walks barefoot across the room, carrying a German Shepherd pup to the crib. The one-year-old baby sleeps with arms wide open, surrounded by a torn mosquito net. At exactly 3 o'clock, the pup gets up and growls. At the wall, the mother turns on the light. Nothing moves. The next day, the dog is found outside the house, barely breathing and covered in live scorpions. That night, despite his injuries, he returns to the crib. And then, the ground starts. To crack love stories with animals? Then hit subscribe and don't miss a thing. Thanks for sticking with us. Now, back to the story. In the vast, sun-scorched landscape of eastern Arizona, where the horizon seemed to stretch into eternity, the Thompson family's old pickup truck kicked up clouds of dust as it traveled down a barely visible dirt road. Sarah Thompson, with her auburn hair tied in a messy bun, squinted against the harsh sunlight, while her husband, Mason, gripped the steering wheel with determined hands. In the back seat, their one-year-old daughter, Lily, slept peacefully, unaware that her entire world was about to change. "Are you sure this is the right way?" Sarah asked, unfolding the weathered map that had been tucked in the glove compartment for weeks. "It feels like we're driving into nowhere." Mason nodded, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Uncle Frank's directions were clear. The ranch should be just beyond that ridge. The decision to move to Mason's late uncle's abandoned ranch had not been an easy one. After Mason lost his construction job in Phoenix and Sarah's teaching position was cut due to budget constraints, the inheritance of a debt-free property seemed like the universe offering them a second chance. They had seen photos, of course, the faded Polaroids of a modest adobe house surrounded by dry land and scattered mesquite trees, but nothing could have prepared them for the reality that awaited. As they crested the final hill, the ranch came into view. The main house, built of clay and wooden beams, stood silhouetted against the afternoon sun. It wasn't grand by any means, but it had character, the kind that comes from weathering decades of desert storms and blistering heat. "There it is," Mason said, his voice caught between excitement and apprehension. "The Cottonwood Ranch." Sarah reached over and squeezed his hand. "Our new beginning." As Mason pulled the truck up to the house, Lily woke with a soft whimper. Sarah turned to comfort her daughter, whose wide blue eyes took in the unfamiliar surroundings with innocent curiosity. "We're home, sweetheart," Sarah whispered, though the words felt strange on her tongue. This place, with its isolation and eerie silence, was nothing like the busy Phoenix suburb they had left behind. The first few hours were spent unloading essentials and exploring their new home. The interior of the house was surprisingly intact, with sturdy furniture covered in sheets and a functioning well system that Uncle Frank had maintained during his infrequent visits. The electricity was basic, powered by an old generator and a few solar panels that would need upgrading, but it was enough to get them started. As dusk approached, Sarah noticed something peculiar. The chickens they had brought with them, intended to be the start of their self-sufficient lifestyle, seemed unusually agitated. They clustered together in one corner of the makeshift pen Mason had constructed, refusing to spread out even when feed was scattered across the ground. "That's odd," Sarah remarked, watching the birds with a frown. "Do you think they're just stressed from the journey?" Mason shrugged, more focused on securing the roof of the chicken coop before nightfall. "Probably. They'll settle in just like we will." But as darkness fell over the ranch, an unsettling silence enveloped the property. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of nature, but rather an absence, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. Sarah, who had grown up in rural Colorado, was accustomed to the sounds of the countryside. Crickets chirping, the rustle of nocturnal animals, the gentle whisper of wind through trees. Here, there was nothing. "It's too quiet," she whispered to Mason as they sat on the porch after putting Lily to bed in her portable crib. "Don't you think it's strange?" Mason took a sip from his lukewarm beer and gazed out at the darkness. It's the desert, Sarah. Different ecosystem, different sounds. Sarah wasn't convinced. Something about this place felt off, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. Perhaps it was just the natural apprehension of starting over in an unfamiliar environment. She decided to keep her concerns to herself, not wanting to add to the stress Mason was already feeling as the primary provider for their family. The next morning brought a new set of oddities. The water in Lily's bath seemed to evaporate more quickly than normal, leaving a fine layer of mineral residue behind. Footprints in the dusty yard disappeared before they could be traced to their source. And most concerning of all, 2 of their 12 chickens had vanished without a trace. No feathers, no signs of predators, nothing to indicate what had happened to them. Maybe a coyote? Mason suggested, examining the pen for breaches, though it's weird there's no evidence. Sarah held Lily close to her chest, a nagging sense of unease growing stronger. I don't like this, Mason. Something doesn't feel right. Mason sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. We've been here less than a day, Sarah. Let's give it time before we start jumping to conclusions. By the 3rd day, they had fallen into a tentative routine. Mason focused on repairing the ranch's infrastructure, fixing leaky pipes, reinforcing weak spots in the roof, clearing away years of accumulated debris. Sarah organized the interior of the house, setting up a proper nursery for Lily in the small room adjacent to their bedroom, and preparing simple meals from the supplies they had brought with them. That afternoon, as the sun began its descent, toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the parched earth, Sarah was hanging laundry on a line stretched between 2 posts when she heard Lily babbling excitedly from her playpen on the porch. Following her daughter's gaze, Sarah spotted a small figure moving slowly along the perimeter of the property. At first, she thought it might be a coyote pup, but as it drew closer, she realized it was a dog. A German Shepherd puppy, no more than a few months old. The animal was painfully thin, its ribs visible beneath a dull coat covered in dust. It moved with obvious exhaustion, occasionally stumbling as it made its way toward the house. "Mason!" Sarah called, hurrying to the porch and picking up Lily. "There's a dog out here." Mason emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "Whose dog? We don't have neighbors for miles." "I don't know, but it looks like it's in bad shape." Together, they watched as the puppy approached, its wary eyes fixed on them with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. When it reached the edge of the yard, it stopped, swaying slightly on its feet. Sarah handed Lily to Mason and slowly approached the puppy, speaking in soft, reassuring tones. "Hey there, little one. Are you lost?" The puppy's tail gave a tentative wag, but it remained rooted in place, as if uncertain whether to trust these strangers. Sarah noticed there was no collar, and the dog's condition suggested it had been on its own for some time. "We can't just leave it out here," she said, glancing back at Mason. "It'll perish in this heat without water and food." Mason hesitated. They had enough challenges adapting to ranch life without adding a stray dog to the mix. But the look in Sarah's eyes told him this wasn't a battle worth fighting. "Fine," he conceded, "but let's be careful. We don't know if it's wild or aggressive." Sarah approached the puppy with slow, deliberate movements, offering her hand for the animal to sniff. After a moment's hesitation, the puppy inched forward, its nose twitching as it caught her scent. When Sarah gently stroked its head, the puppy leaned into her touch, its eyes closing briefly in what appeared to be relief. "Poor thing," Sarah murmured, noting the patches of missing fur and small wounds that dotted the puppy's body. "Let's get you some water and food." As Sarah led the puppy toward the house, Lily squealed with delight, reaching out her small hands toward the new arrival. To everyone's surprise, the puppy's demeanor changed instantly. It perked up, ears forward, eyes locked on the baby with an intensity that was almost unsettling. "Careful," Mason warned, holding Lily a little tighter. "We don't know how it is with kids." But his concern proved unnecessary. When Sarah brought the puppy closer, it approached Lily with remarkable gentleness, sniffing her feet and looking up at her with what could only be described as adoration. Lily, in turn, patted the puppy's head with her chubby hands, giggling when it licked her fingers. "I think they like each other," Sarah said, smiling at the unexpected bond forming before her eyes. Mason relaxed slightly, though he remained vigilant. What should we call it, assuming we're keeping it, that is? Sarah watched as the puppy settled at their feet, its eyes never leaving Lily. There was something protective in its gaze, as if it had appointed itself the baby's guardian. "Ranger," she decided. "Let's call him Ranger." That night, as they prepared for bed, Sarah insisted on letting Ranger sleep in Lily's room. Mason was hesitant, but agreed on the condition that they leave the connecting door open so they could hear if anything happened. "I still think it's strange that a puppy would be wandering around out here all alone," Mason said as they settled under the thin sheet, the desert night already cooling rapidly around them. "Where did it come from?" Sarah turned to look at him in the dim light filtering through the curtainless window. "Maybe it was meant to find us." Mason chuckled at his wife's sentiment. Always the romantic. "I'm serious, Mason. Don't you find it odd that of all places this puppy showed up at our doorstep, in the middle of nowhere?" Before Mason could respond, a sound cut through the night, a high-pitched, desperate cry that sent them both bolting upright. "Lily!" Sarah gasped, already on her feet and rushing toward their daughter's room. When Sarah burst into Lily's room, her heart pounding in her chest, she expected to find her daughter in some kind of distress. Instead, she was met with a peculiar scene. Lily was sitting up in her crib, crying intensely, but there was no obvious cause for her distress. No visible injury, no soiled diaper, nothing that would typically trigger such a reaction. What caught Sarah's attention, however, was Ranger's behavior. The German Shepherd puppy was standing rigid beside the crib, his ears perked forward, his gaze fixed on a shadowy corner of the room. A low, continuous growl rumbled from his throat, a sound that seemed impossibly deep for such a young dog. "What is it, boy?" Mason asked, following Sarah's gaze to the corner where Ranger was staring. Sarah picked up Lily, whose cries began to subside almost immediately upon being held. "I don't see anything." Mason grabbed a flashlight from the bedside table and directed its beam toward the corner. The light revealed nothing unusual, just the junction of two adobe walls and the packed earth floor that they hadn't yet had time to cover with proper flooring. "Maybe she had a nightmare," Mason suggested, relaxing slightly. "And the dog is just reacting to her distress." Sarah wasn't convinced. She'd been a mother long enough to recognize different types of cries, and this hadn't sounded like Lily's typical nightmare response. This had been fear, pure and immediate. "I'm going to keep her with us tonight," she decided, already heading back to their bedroom. Mason nodded, but paused when he noticed Ranger hadn't moved. The puppy remained fixated on the corner, his growl now silenced, but his body language screaming alertness. "Come on, Ranger!" Mason called, patting his leg. After a moment's hesitation, the puppy reluctantly followed, though he continued to glance back at the corner, as if expecting something to emerge from the shadows. The next morning, Sarah examined Lily's room in the clear light of day. Nothing seemed out of place, but when she knelt to check the corner that had captivated Ranger's attention, she noticed something odd. A series of small, circular indentations in the packed earth floor, as if something had been pressed into the dirt, "Mason, come look at this," she called. Her husband appeared in the doorway, Lily balanced on his hip. "What is it?" "These marks. They weren't here yesterday when I set up the room." Mason crouched beside her, frowning at the distinct patterns, probably just from the furniture, or maybe Ranger was digging. But the marks didn't resemble paw prints or the legs of furniture. They were perfect circles, evenly spaced and surprisingly deep. "I don't like this," Sarah murmured, running her fingers over the indentations. "You're overthinking it," Mason said, standing up and adjusting Lily in his arms. "This place has been abandoned for years. There are bound to be quirks we'll discover as we settle in." Sarah wanted to believe him, but a nagging sense of unease had taken root in her mind. Still, she had too much to do to dwell on mysterious marks in the dirt. There was unpacking to finish, a vegetable garden to plan, and a puppy to nurse back to health. Throughout the day, Sarah noticed that Ranger never strayed far from Lily. When the baby napped, the puppy lay beside her portable crib. When she played on a blanket in the shade of the porch, Ranger positioned himself at the edge of the blanket, his alert eyes scanning the surroundings. It was as if he had appointed himself her personal guardian. "He's really attached to her," Sarah commented as she and Mason ate a simple lunch of sandwiches on the porch. Mason nodded, watching as Ranger gently licked Lily's fingers when she reached for him. It's like they've known each other forever, not just a day. As the afternoon progressed, Sarah began to notice other peculiarities about their new home. The chickens continued to behave strangely, clustering together and refusing to scratch in certain areas of their pen. A water bowl left on the porch evaporated within an hour, despite being placed in the shade. And most puzzling of all, Ranger would not enter specific parts of the yard, giving them a wide berth or stopping abruptly at invisible boundaries. "Animals have better senses than we do," Sarah told Mason when he dismissed her observations. "They notice things we can't." That night, they decided to keep Lily in their room, her portable crib positioned at the foot of their bed. Ranger settled on the floor beside her, his head resting on his paws, but his eyes alert. Despite the precaution, Sarah woke at precisely 3 in the morning to the sound of Lily's cries, identical to the previous night. And once again, Ranger was already on his feet, hackles raised, staring intently at the bedroom door. "Mason," Sarah whispered, shaking her husband awake, "it's happening again." This time, Mason took the disturbance more seriously. He grabbed his flashlight and slowly opened the bedroom door, half expecting to find an intruder. The hallway was empty, but Ranger pushed past him, growling softly as he padded toward Lily's empty room. Sarah, with Lily now quiet in her arms, followed at a distance. From the doorway, they watched as Ranger circled the room, sniffing frantically at the floor and walls. When he reached the corner with the circular indentations, he began to paw at the earth, whining with increasing urgency. "He's found something," Sarah said, her voice barely audible. Mason approached cautiously, directing his flashlight beam at the spot where Ranger was digging. As the puppy scraped away the loose dirt, something gleamed in the light, small, metallic, with a curved silhouette. "What the hell?" Mason muttered, kneeling for a closer look. Before he could examine it further, Ranger suddenly yelped and jumped back, shaking his paw as if in pain. In the beam of the flashlight, Sarah caught a glimpse of movement, something small and yellow-brown, scuttling across the floor, disappearing into a tiny crack near the baseboard. "Was that?" she began, but Mason was already pulling her and Lily back from the doorway. "A scorpion," he confirmed grimly, "a big one." Sarah clutched Lily tighter, her mind racing. "In the house? How?" "This place has been empty for years, Sarah. It's the desert. Scorpions are part of the ecosystem." "But," Something didn't add up. The circular marks, Lily's consistent crying at the same time each night, Ranger's protective behavior. It felt like pieces of a puzzle they couldn't yet see clearly. The next morning, Mason drove to the nearest town, a small, dusty settlement, 40 minutes away, and returned with supplies to secure the house. Caulk for ceiling cracks, fine mesh screens for vents, and scorpion repellent recommended by the local hardware store owner. Mrs. Delgado at the store said scorpions are common out here, but they usually stay away from occupied homes, he reported as he unloaded the supplies. She seemed surprised when I mentioned they might be inside the house. Sarah, who had spent the morning inspecting every corner of the ranch house, had made a disturbing discovery. The circular indentations weren't limited to Lily's room. They appeared in various spots throughout the house, always near walls or corners, always in the same distinctive pattern. "I don't think these are ordinary scorpions, Mason," she said, showing him what she'd found. "Look, these marks are everywhere. And have you noticed how the chickens avoid certain areas? How Ranger won't go near specific spots in the yard?" Mason frowned, running his hand through his hair, a gesture Sarah recognized as a sign of his growing concern. "What are you suggesting? That we have some kind of scorpion infestation?" Sarah nodded slowly. "I think it might be more than that. I think Uncle Frank's ranch might be built on top of something, a scorpion den or nest or whatever they live in." The thought hung between them, unsettling in its implications. If Sarah was right, their dream of a fresh start might be in serious jeopardy. That afternoon, as Mason worked to seal every possible entry point around the house, Sarah noticed Ranger behaving oddly again. The puppy, who had been resting in the shade near Lily's playpen, suddenly stood up, his body tense. He began to move in a strange pattern across the yard, stopping at specific points, sniffing intensely, then moving to another spot. "Mason," Sarah called, pointing to the puppy. "Look at what he's doing." They watched as Ranger continued his peculiar ritual, creating what almost appeared to be a map of the property. Areas he approached cautiously, others he avoided entirely, and a few where he stopped and pawed at the ground with obvious distress. "It's like he knows where they are," Sarah whispered, the realization sending a chill down her spine despite the desert heat. Mason's skepticism was visibly weakening. But how would a puppy know about scorpions? He couldn't have been out here long enough to learn. Sarah shook her head, watching as Ranger returned to Lily's side, positioning himself between the baby and a particular section of the yard. "I don't know, but I'm starting to think finding him wasn't a coincidence." That night, they implemented a new routine. They moved their mattress into the living room, the area Ranger seemed most comfortable in day, and created a family sleeping space away from the walls. Mason sprinkled a barrier of diatomaceous earth, another recommendation from Mrs. Delgado, around their sleeping area. Despite their precautions, Sarah woke once again at 3 in the morning. This time, however, it wasn't to Lily's cries but to Ranger's soft whimpering. The puppy was lying at the edge of their mattress, his paws twitching in his sleep, small sounds of distress escaping his throat. Sarah gently stroked his fur, trying to comfort him without waking the others. Under her touch, she felt something unusual. Small, hard lumps beneath his fur, concentrated on his legs and underbelly. Carefully, using the dim light of her phone, she examined the puppy more closely. What she discovered made her blood run cold. Ranger's body was covered in tiny puncture marks, dozens of them in various stages of healing. "Oh, Ranger," she breathed, her eyes filling with tears as the truth dawned on her. The puppy hadn't just been wandering in the desert when they found him. He had been fighting, protecting himself against the very threat that now seemed to be surrounding their home. As if sensing her distress, Ranger opened his eyes and looked up at her with an intelligence that seemed beyond his years. In that moment, Sarah understood what she needed to do. This wasn't just about making their new home habitable, it was about unraveling the mystery of what lay beneath the Cottonwood Ranch, and why a lone German Shepherd puppy had appeared just when they needed him most. The revelation of Ranger's injuries changed everything for the Thompson family. What had initially seemed like strange coincidences now appeared to be part of a larger, more troubling pattern. The following morning, Sarah convinced Mason that they needed expert help. "We need to know what we're dealing with," she insisted. As they sat at the kitchen table, Lily babbling happily in her high chair, unaware of her parents' concerns. "These aren't just random scorpions, Mason. Something unusual is happening here." Mason nodded, his earlier skepticism replaced by grim acceptance. "I'll call the county extension office. They might be able to send someone out." While Mason made calls, Sarah turned her attention to Ranger. Using the first aid kit they'd brought from Phoenix, she carefully cleaned and treated each of the puncture wounds she could find. The puppy remained remarkably still during the process, wincing occasionally, but never attempting to pull away. "You're being so brave," she murmured, gently applying antibiotic ointment to a particularly nasty sting on his hind leg. "How are you even alive with so many stings?" According to everything Sarah had read online, multiple scorpion stings should have been fatal for a puppy ranger's size. Yet here he was, weakened but resilient, his focus on Lily unwavering even as Sarah tended to his wounds. By mid-afternoon, Mason had arranged for a visit from Dr. Nathan Reynolds, an entomologist from the State University who happened to be conducting research in a nearby town. The scientist couldn't come until the following day, however, which meant they had another night to get through. "We should all sleep in the truck tonight," Sarah suggested, not willing to risk another night inside the house. Mason agreed, and they spent the remaining daylight hours preparing a makeshift bed in the back of their pickup, using sleeping bags and pillows to create a secure space for the three of them, 4, including Ranger, who Sarah insisted must join them. As dusk settled over the desert, casting long shadows across the parched landscape, Sarah noticed something disturbing. Small movements in the dirt around the perimeter of the house, almost imperceptible shifts and stirrings, as if the very ground was awakening with the departure of the sun. "Mason," she called softly, pointing to a spot near the porch steps. "Do you see that?" Mason squinted in the fading light. "See what?" "The dirt. It's moving." Mason looked again, more carefully this time, and his expression changed as he finally noticed what Sarah was seeing. Tiny disturbances in the surface of the ground, like miniature sand dunes shifting in a gentle breeze, except there was no wind. "Jesus," he muttered, instinctively pulling Lily closer to his chest. "Let's get in the truck. Now." They spent an uncomfortable night in the confined space of the pickup, taking turns to stay awake and watch for any signs of danger. Ranger remained vigilant throughout, occasionally growling softly at sounds or movements only he could detect. By morning, all 4 of them were exhausted but unharmed. After a quick breakfast of cereal and bottled water, they waited anxiously for Dr. Reynolds to arrive. The entomologist pulled up just before noon in a dusty Jeep loaded with scientific equipment. Dr. Reynolds was younger than they had expected, probably in his early 30s, with sun-weathered skin and enthusiastic eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Mrs. Thompson, Mr. Thompson," he called as he approached, his gaze sweeping over the property with professional interest. "I'm Nathan Reynolds. From the university. You folks have a scorpion problem, I hear." Sarah stepped forward, Lily on her hip and Ranger at her heels. We think it might be more than just a problem, Dr. Reynolds. We think there might be some kind of colony under our property. Dr. Reynolds raised an eyebrow. A colony? Scorpions aren't typically colonial creatures, Mrs. Thompson. They're usually solitary, coming together only to mate. Then we're dealing with something unusual, Mason interjected, guiding the scientist toward the house. Because what we've seen in the past few days doesn't match any normal scorpion behavior. Over the next hour, they showed Dr. Reynolds everything. The circular indentations in the dirt floors, the spots in the yard that Ranger avoided, the strange behavior of the chickens, and finally, Ranger himself, his injuries and his protective stance toward Lily. Dr. Reynolds examined the puppy with gentle hands, his expression growing increasingly puzzled. These are definitely scorpion stings, he confirmed, looking up at Sarah. Dozens of them. By all accounts, this dog should be gone. But he's not, Sarah said softly. He's protecting Lily. Dr. Reynolds glanced at the baby, then back at the puppy. You said you found him wandering near the property line? No collar, no identification? Mason nodded. Just showed up out of nowhere, skin and bones covered in dust. And immediately bonded with your daughter, Dr. Reynolds mused, scratching his chin thoughtfully. Interesting. After completing his examination of Ranger, the scientist requested permission to inspect the house and surrounding property. Armed with specialized equipment from his Jeep, including a UV light that made scorpions glow fluorescent green, he methodically worked his way through each room, taking samples, making notes, and occasionally emitting low whistles of surprise. Sarah and Mason followed at a distance, Lily secured in a baby carrier on Sarah's chest, Ranger never more than a step away. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, Dr. Reynolds finally said, turning to face them in the main room of the house. I've seen a lot of unusual phenomena in my career, but nothing quite like this. Sarah felt her heart sink. What is it? What's happening here? Dr. Reynolds gestured to the floor. Your property appears to be situated above what we call a super colony, a rare phenomenon where scorpions exhibit cooperative behavior rather than their typical solitary habits. It's only been documented a handful of times, usually in response to environmental pressures or unique ecological circumstances. Mason frowned. But what does that mean for us? For our home? It means, Dr. Reynolds said gravely, that you're essentially living on top of a scorpion metropolis. Based on the patterns I'm seeing, there's likely an extensive network of tunnels and chambers beneath your property, housing thousands, possibly tens of thousands, of scorpions. Sarah gasped, instinctively holding Lily tighter. But how? Why here? Dr. Reynolds knelt to examine one of the circular indentations more closely. My guess, water. You mentioned an old well system. Underground water sources are precious in the desert. Over time, these scorpions may have adapted to live communally around this water source, developing behaviors that aren't typical of their species. The implications were staggering. Their dream home, their fresh start, was built atop a massive scorpion colony that had likely been developing for decades. Can it be eliminated? Mason asked, the practical question uppermost in his mind. Can we make this place safe? Dr. Reynolds straightened up, his expression somber. A traditional pest control won't work for something of this scale. You'd need specialized treatments, possibly excavation, environmental impact studies. He trailed off, clearly reluctant to spell out the full extent of what would be required. You're saying we can't stay here? Sarah concluded, her voice flat with disappointment. To their surprise, Dr. Reynolds shook his head. I'm not saying that at all, Mrs. Thompson. I'm saying this is a unique ecological situation that requires careful management, not abandonment. He turned his attention to Ranger. who had positioned himself between Lily and a particular section of wall. And I'm extremely interested in your puppy's behavior. He seems to have developed an awareness of the scorpion's movement patterns, possibly even a method of detecting them before they emerge. Sarah followed his gaze. He's been protecting Lily since the moment we found him. That's what's most fascinating, Dr. Reynolds said, his scientific curiosity evident in his voice. It's almost as if... He didn't finish the thought, but Sarah could guess what he was thinking. It was almost as if Ranger had come to them specifically for this purpose, as if he somehow knew they would need his protection. What do we do now? Mason asked, bringing the conversation back to practical concerns. Dr. Reynolds began packing. His equipment, his mind clearly racing with possibilities. With your permission, I'd like to set up some monitoring equipment around the property. Motion sensors, infrared cameras, vibration detectors, tools that will help us understand the colony's behavior patterns. The more we know, the better. We can develop a management strategy. He paused, looking directly at Sarah and Mason. And I'd like to document your puppy's behavior. His interactions with the scorpions, his protective patterns, his relationship with your daughter. All of it. He may hold the key to understanding how to coexist with this colony. The word coexist hung in the air between them. It wasn't what Sarah and Mason had expected to hear. They had anticipated being told they needed to abandon the property, to give up on their dream of a fresh start in this remote corner of Arizona. You think we can actually live here? Sarah asked cautiously. Safely. Dr. Reynolds nodded slowly. With the right precautions, yes. The fact is, this colony has likely been here for generations. Your uncle managed to live here, albeit intermittently. With modern technology and your puppy's unusual abilities, I believe it's possible to establish a safe living situation. He glanced at his watch. I need to head back to the university to gather more equipment and consult with colleagues. In the meantime, I'd recommend continuing to sleep in your vehicle and avoiding the house at night when scorpion activity appears to peak. As Dr. Reynolds prepared to leave, he handed Sarah a small device, a handheld UV light similar to the one he had used during his inspection. Use this after dark to check for scorpions. They'll glow bright green under the light, and keep documenting your puppy's behavior. Any patterns you notice, areas he avoids, times when he seems most alert. With the scientist gone, Sarah and Mason sat on the porch steps, watching as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon. Lily played contentedly in her portable playpen, Ranger lying beside it, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. What do you think? Mason asked finally, breaking the silence that had settled between them. Do we stay and fight, or cut our losses? Sarah considered the question carefully. This wasn't the fresh start they had envisioned, living in constant vigilance against an unseen enemy beneath their feet. Yet something about Dr. Reynolds' fascination with their situation, and particularly with Ranger's role in it, gave her pause. I think, she said slowly, that there's something special happening here. Something we don't fully understand yet. She looked at Ranger, who met her gaze with an intelligence that continued to surprise her. He found us for a reason, Mason, and Lily trusts him completely. I think we should at least give Dr. Reynolds time to study the situation before we make any decisions. Mason nodded, reaching for her hand. Then we stay, for now. That night, as they settled into their makeshift bed in the truck, Sarah used the UV light to scan the area around them. What she saw confirmed Dr. Reynolds' assessment. Dozens of scorpions, glowing an eerie green in the darkness, moving in what appeared to be coordinated patterns across the property. They seemed to be emerging from specific points. cracks in the earth, spaces beneath rocks, the bases of old fence posts, and converging toward the house. But something else caught her attention as well. None of the scorpions approached the truck. It was as if an invisible boundary existed around their vehicle, one the creatures would not cross. "Mason," she whispered, nudging her husband. "Look at this." Mason peered out the window, following the beam of the UV light. "They're keeping their distance, but why?" The answer came from the back of the truck, where Ranger lay curled protectively around Lily's small form. The puppy was awake, his eyes reflecting the moonlight, his body positioned between the baby and the outside world. "It's him," Sarah realized. "They're avoiding him." The discovery raised as many questions as it answered, but it offered a glimmer of hope. If Ranger could somehow deter the scorpions, perhaps there was indeed a way to carve out a safe existence on this land. Dr. Reynolds returned the following day with a truckload of equipment and 2 graduate students eager to assist with what the entomologist was now calling a unique ecological phenomenon. The scientific team quickly transformed the Thompsons' property into a research station, setting up monitoring devices around the perimeter, drilling small core samples from various points in the yard, and establishing a temporary lab in the barn. "We need to understand the scope and structure of this colony," Dr. Reynolds explained as he guided Sarah and Mason through the array of technological equipment now surrounding their home. "These sensors will detect movement patterns, thermal changes, and even the subtle vibrations that might indicate mass migration within the tunnel system." Sarah listened intently, holding Lily on her hip while Ranger sat alert at her feet. "And once you understand it, then we can develop a management strategy," Dr. Reynolds replied. "Not elimination, that would be ecologically devastating and probably impossible, but coexistence, a way for your family to live safely alongside this remarkable adaptation of nature." Mason remained skeptical. "I'm not interested in becoming a case study, Dr. Reynolds. I just want to keep my family safe." The scientist nodded understandingly. "Of course, Mr. Thompson, but I believe the 2 goals are aligned. The more we know about this super colony, the better equipped you'll be to protect your family." By midday, the first data began streaming in from the sensors, confirming what Dr. Reynolds had suspected. Beneath the Thompsons' property lay an intricate network of tunnels and chambers, home to what appeared to be thousands of scorpions, organized in a hierarchical structure unlike anything previously documented in arachnid behavior. "It's as if they've developed a primitive social order," one of the graduate students marveled, pointing to a 3D rendering of the subsurface area. "Look at these main chambers. They're positioned around underground water sources, with smaller tunnels branching outward like suburbs around a city center." Dr. Reynolds nodded excitedly. "The desert's harsh conditions have forced an evolutionary adaptation. Instead of competing as solitary predators, these scorpions have developed cooperative behaviors to survive." While the scientists exclaimed over their findings, Sarah's attention was drawn to Ranger, who had begun exhibiting a new behavior. The puppy was moving methodically around the yard, stopping at specific points and pawing at the ground with increasing urgency. "Dr. Reynolds!" she called, pointing to the dog. "I think he's trying to show us something." The entomologist hurried over, followed by Mason and the graduate students. They watched as Ranger continued his strange ritual, creating what appeared to be a map of invisible points across the property. "Get the UV scanner," Dr. Reynolds instructed one of his assistants. "Let's check these spots after dark." As evening approached, the scientists prepared for what they believed would be peak scorpion activity. The Thompson family was instructed to remain in their truck, while Dr. Reynolds and his team positioned themselves at strategic observation points around the property. From the relative safety of the pickup, Sarah watched through the window as darkness fell over the desert. Using night vision goggles and UV lights, the research team documented the emergence of scorpions from the earth. First a few, then dozens, then hundreds, their bodies glowing an eerie green under the specialized lights. "It's beautiful, in a terrifying way," she whispered to Mason, who sat beside her with Lily asleep in his arms. Mason squeezed her hand. "As long as they stay away from us, they can be as beautiful as they want." But it was Ranger's behavior that captured everyone's attention that night. The puppy, who had insisted on remaining outside the truck despite Sarah's protests, positioned himself at various points around the vehicle, the exact points he had identified earlier in the day. At each location he would stand firm, sometimes growling softly, creating what appeared to be a protective perimeter. Through their monitoring equipment, Dr. Reynolds and his team confirmed what Sarah had noticed the previous night. The scorpions avoided the areas where Ranger stood guard. It was as if the puppy had established a safe zone around the family's temporary shelter. "Remarkable," Dr. Reynolds murmured, making notes as he observed through his night vision equipment. "It's almost like he's communicating with them, establishing boundaries they recognize and respect." The next morning, the scientific team was buzzing with excitement. The data they had collected overnight had exceeded their expectations, providing insights into scorpion behavior that could potentially revolutionize their understanding of arachnid social structures. "Based on what we've observed," Dr. Reynolds explained over coffee in the makeshift outdoor kitchen Sarah had established, "these scorpions appear to be most active between 2 and 4 a.m., with peak emergence occurring precisely at 3:15 a.m. each night." Sarah glanced at Mason. "That's exactly when Lily would start crying." Dr. Reynolds nodded. "Children often have heightened sensitivity to changes in their environment. She was likely sensing the increased activity beneath the house." "And Ranger?" Mason asked. "How do you explain his behavior?" The scientist's expression grew thoughtful. "That's the most fascinating aspect of all this. From the wounds on his body, it's clear he's had extensive contact with this colony, or one very similar to it. He's developed not just an awareness of their patterns, but a method of interaction. The way he positions himself, his vocalizations, even his scent markers. They all seem designed to establish territorial boundaries the scorpions recognize." Sarah stroked Ranger's head, marveling at the puppy who had become so crucial to their safety. "But where did he come from? How did he find us?" Dr. Reynolds shook his head. "That I can't answer. It could be coincidence or..." "Or what?" Mason prompted. "Or instinct on a level we don't yet understand," the scientist finished. "Animals have capabilities we're only beginning to comprehend. Perhaps he sensed your vulnerability, particularly Lily's, and was drawn to it." Over the next week, the Thompson property transformed into something between a scientific research station and a controlled construction site. Dr. Reynolds' findings had attracted attention from the university's environmental science department, and additional researchers arrived to study what was being called the Arizona supercolony phenomenon. For Sarah and Mason, however, the academic excitement was secondary to the practical question: could they actually live here safely? Dr. Reynolds believed they could, and he developed a comprehensive plan to make it possible. Drawing on Ranger's seemingly intuitive understanding of the scorpion's behavior, the scientists created a map of the property, identifying hot zones where scorpion activity was most concentrated and safe zones where the creatures rarely ventured. "What we're proposing," Dr. Reynolds explained as he spread a detailed blueprint across the kitchen table, "is essentially a reimagined living space that works with the colony rather than against it. The plan was ambitious but practical. Elevate the main house on concrete pillars treated with a non-toxic scorpion repellent developed from compounds found in ranges. Install specialized lighting systems that would discourage nocturnal scorpion movement. Create a series of controlled water sources away from the living areas to redirect the colony's focus. And establish perimeter stations that would replicate Ranger's boundary-setting behaviors. It's essentially biomimicry, one of the graduate students explained. We're learning from Ranger's techniques and reproducing them technologically. Mason studied the plans with a contractor's eye. This won't be cheap or quick. No, Dr. Reynolds admitted, but the university is offering to fund a significant portion as part of our research grant. We see this as a prototype for sustainable living in scorpion-prone areas across the Southwest. Sarah, who had been quietly listening, finally spoke. And it will be safe for Lily? You're certain? Dr. Reynolds nodded. With these adaptations and Ranger's continued presence, yes. In fact, I believe your daughter will grow up with a unique understanding of desert ecology that few children could ever experience. The decision wasn't easy, but ultimately, Sarah and Mason chose to stay. The alternative, abandoning their fresh start, returning to Phoenix defeated and broke, seemed more daunting than facing the challenge before them. Besides, there was something about this land, about the strange confluence of events that had brought them here, that felt significant in ways they couldn't fully articulate. This is our home now, Sarah told Mason as they watched the sunset from their truck that evening. Challenges and all. Mason squeezed her hand. I think Uncle Frank knew more than he let on. Why else would he have kept this place all these years, visiting occasionally but never selling? Sarah considered this. Maybe he had his own ranger once upon a time. Construction began immediately, with a team of workers specialized in desert building techniques. The main house was carefully lifted and secured on concrete pillars, creating an open space beneath that would be illuminated with special UV lighting at night. The floors were replaced with sealed concrete, and all walls were reinforced and treated with the repellent compound derived from analysis of Ranger's fur. Most fascinating of all was the Ranger system, as the scientists had dubbed it, a network of electronic posts positioned around the property that emitted low-frequency vibrations, mimicking the warning signals they had recorded from the puppy. These posts, powered by solar panels, created a protective perimeter that the scorpions seemed reluctant to cross. Throughout the construction process, Ranger remained vigilant, often guiding the workers away from particularly active scorpion areas or standing guard near Lily's portable playpen. The puppy's health had improved dramatically under Sarah's care, and a specialized diet recommended by a veterinarian who had joined the research team. His coat was now glossy, his eyes bright, and his energy seemingly boundless, except when it came to his self-appointed duty of watching over Lily, which he performed with unwavering focus. One afternoon, about 3 weeks into the renovation, Sarah noticed something remarkable. Lily, who had recently begun to toddle around on unsteady legs, stopped suddenly in the middle of the yard, her attention fixed on a spot near the old well. She pointed with her small finger and made an urgent sound. Not quite a word, but clearly a communication. Ranger, who had been resting nearby, immediately rose and trotted to the spot Lily had indicated. He began to paw at the ground, whining softly. "Mason," Sarah called, alerting her husband who was working with the construction crew. "Something's happening." By the time Mason reached them, Ranger had exposed a small opening in the earth, a freshly formed tunnel entrance barely visible to the human eye. "Get Dr. Reynolds," Mason told one of the workers, while he quickly moved Lily away from the area. When the entomologist arrived, he examined the tunnel with obvious excitement. "This is new," he confirmed, "formed within the last 24 hours. based on the soil displacement. Sarah looked from Lily to Ranger and back again. She saw it first, before Ranger did. Dr. Reynolds glanced at the baby, who was watching the proceedings with unusual intensity for a 1-year-old. "Children often perceive things adults miss," he said thoughtfully. "Their senses haven't been dulled by years of filtering out irrelevant information." "But how did she know to alert Ranger?" Mason asked, the protective father in him both concerned and fascinated. The scientist shook his head. "That's the kind of question that keeps researchers awake at night, Mr. Thompson. The communication between your daughter and this puppy defies conventional explanation." As if to illustrate the point, Lily suddenly squirmed in Mason's arms, reaching toward Ranger. When Mason set her down, she toddled directly to the puppy and placed her small hand on his head. Ranger responded by licking her face gently, then turning to stare at another spot several feet away. Without hesitation, Lily pointed to the same spot and made another urgent sound. This time, everyone watched as Ranger investigated the area. Lily had identified, revealing yet another freshly formed tunnel entrance. "My God," Dr. Reynolds breathed, his scientific detachment momentarily forgotten. "They're working together. Somehow they're communicating about the colony's movements." The discovery marked a turning point in the research. Dr. Reynolds and his team began to document the apparent communication between Lily and Ranger, developing what they called the interspecies detection theory. According to their observations, Lily seemed able to sense subtle changes in the environment, perhaps vibrations or sounds beyond adult human perception, while Ranger possessed both the ability to interpret her alerts and the knowledge of how to respond to the scorpion threat. Together, they formed a remarkably effective early warning system. This unexpected development accelerated the renovation process. If Lily and Ranger could detect new tunnel formations, they could help the scientific team create an even more effective protection strategy. The university increased its funding, bringing in additional experts in child development, animal behavior, and environmental adaptation. One rainy evening, as the desert experienced a rare downpour, the system faced its greatest test. The sudden influx of water into the dry ground triggered unusual activity in the scorpion colony. The monitoring equipment recorded massive movement through the tunnel network, suggesting a potential large-scale emergence. Sarah and Mason, now sleeping in the partially renovated house, were awakened by Lily's urgent cries. Not the frightened wails of previous nights, but sharp, purposeful sounds. When they rushed to her room, they found Ranger already there, pawing frantically at a corner where the wall met the new concrete floor. "Mason, get the UV light," Sarah instructed, picking up Lily from her crib. When Mason returned and shone the light on the area, they saw it, a hairline crack in the concrete, barely visible to the naked eye, and through it, the faint glow of scorpion bodies, dozens of them pushing against the barrier that separated them from the house. "Call Dr. Reynolds," Mason said urgently, already moving to gather emergency supplies. "We need to evacuate." But Sarah hesitated, watching as Ranger positioned himself directly over the crack, his body tense but not fearful. Lily, still in Sarah's arms, reached toward the puppy and made a series of sounds that, to Sarah's astonishment, almost resembled words. "Wait," she told Mason. "Look at them." Ranger began a behavior they had never seen before, a rhythmic movement combined with a low, pulsing growl. His paws pressed against the concrete in a deliberate pattern, creating vibrations that Sarah could feel through the floor. Dr. Reynolds arrived 20 minutes later, drenched from the rain, but carrying specialized equipment. By then, something remarkable had happened. The scorpions had retreated from the crack, their glowing bodies disappearing back into the earth beneath the house. "They responded to him," Sarah explained, still watching in amazement as Ranger maintained his position over the crack. He wasn't driving them away. He was communicating with them. The entomologist immediately set up monitoring devices around the area. "These readings are extraordinary," he confirmed after several minutes of data collection. "The vibrations Ranger is producing match almost exactly the communication patterns we've recorded within the colony. It's as if he's speaking their language." "But how?" Mason asked, the pragmatic builder still struggling to accept what seemed impossible. "How could a dog learn to communicate with scorpions?" Dr. Reynolds shook his head in wonder. "Adaptation works in mysterious ways, Mr. Thompson. Perhaps living in proximity to the colony, fighting for survival, Ranger developed an understanding of their communication methods. Or perhaps what?" Sarah prompted. "Perhaps he was always meant to be here," the scientist said softly, "a natural mediator between your world and theirs." In the weeks that followed, the Cottonwood Communication System, as it came to be known in scientific circles, became the foundation for a groundbreaking approach to human-arachnid coexistence. Ranger's vibration patterns were recorded and incorporated into the property's protection infrastructure, creating not just barriers but actual communication channels with the scorpion colony. The renovated house was completed by early fall, incorporating all the latest findings from the research team. Elevated on its concrete pillars, wrapped in a protective system of lights and vibration emitters, it stood as a testament to human ingenuity and respect for the natural world, even its more frightening aspects. Sarah and Mason officially moved back into their home on a crisp October evening, exactly 6 months after they had first arrived at Cottonwood Ranch. Lily's room, now secured with multiple layers of protection, featured a special sleeping alcove for Ranger, built into the base of her crib. As they settled in for their first night, Sarah couldn't help but reflect on the strange journey that had brought them here, the inheritance of a seemingly ordinary desert property that had turned out to be extraordinary in ways they could never have imagined. "Do you think Uncle Frank knew?" she asked Mason as they stood in the doorway of Lily's room, watching their daughter sleep peacefully with Ranger at his usual post. Mason considered the question. "I think he understood something was special about this place. Maybe that's why he never sold it, even when he could have used the money." Sarah nodded. "And Ranger, do you think he was sent to us somehow?" Mason, once the skeptic, now wrapped his arm around his wife's shoulders. "I've stopped questioning the how and why. Sarah, I'm just grateful he found us when we needed him most. Cottonwood Ranch would never be an ordinary home. The family that lived there would always share their land with thousands of creatures most people feared. But in that unusual arrangement, they had found something precious, a harmony with nature that few ever experience, a deeper understanding of the world's complexities, and a profound appreciation for the unexpected guardians that sometimes enter our lives just when we need them most." The Thompson family's story spread beyond scientific circles, touching people who had never given a second thought to scorpions or the delicate ecosystems of the desert. Visitors came from across the country to see the property where humans and arachnids had found a way to coexist, guided by the unlikely partnership of a child and her faithful dog. And at the center of it all was Ranger. Once a starving, wounded stray, now a healthy, vibrant guardian whose intelligence and courage had changed the course of multiple lives, human and otherwise. Each night, as the desert darkness wrapped around Cottonwood Ranch, he would take his place beside Lily's bed, alert to every subtle shift in the earth beneath them, ready to bridge the gap between two worlds that had once seemed impossibly opposed. In the soft glow of the nightlight, Sarah often watched them together, her daughter's small hand resting on Ranger's fur, both of them somehow understanding more about their unusual home than any adult ever could. In those quiet moments, she knew with absolute certainty that they had not just found a house in the desert, but their true home. Dear listeners, we hope the story of the Thompson family, Lily, and their guardian Ranger has touched your heart. For more emotional journeys like this one, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories. Find it by clicking on the link to your left. If you enjoyed this tale of unexpected connection and natural harmony, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day we bring unique stories that explore life's complexity and the bonds that sustain us through challenges. Don't miss our upcoming content. We look forward to reading your thoughts. In the comment section below,